Hey everyone, welcome to Hit the Apex podcast. It's Jawad here as always, and thank you for joining me this Tuesday after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. My schedule allowed for an earlier recording this week. Pretty busy heading into this back part of the year with the new job and everything, and also getting ready to go away this weekend to Adelaide, and of course the Adelaide 500 coming up in a fortnight's time or less than a fortnight's time, so I'll do a little preview for that at the end of this show. But the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix rounds out the 2022 Formula One season, and kind of like the season as a whole, there was potential, there was little moments of excitement, of course, with the strategy and some on-track battles, but overall a dull affair, and that's really sad when, I have to say it like that. I'm not trying to be, vicious or anything, or, get abusive with my criticism and whatnot, but it's a bit sad, really, to come into this new era of Formula One where, we were promised a lot more closer racing. The potential was there for a championship battle as well between Ferrari and Red Bull. But in the end, what we got was Max Verstappen with another masterclass, his 15th win of the season, of course. Behind him, Charles Leclerc at Sergio Perez, so second in the championship goes the way of the Monegasque, to Ferrari as well on the constructors. But what's more galling, I think, is when you look at the statistics, and Max's 15 wins equals the record back from 1988, that at that time was the best record for a particular team set by McLaren Honda. 15 wins out of the 16 races they had, and that was split between Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna. So for Max to, do it in a single season, yes, we've got more races these days. Next year we've got 24, potentially, if, the Chinese GP doesn't drop off, which it sounds like it will, and doesn't sound like it will get replaced like they were talking about with Portugal. So it kind of dilutes that in a way. When you look at it percentage-wise as well, it was brought to my attention that, Sebastian Vettel's record in 2013 was still, like 0.5% better than Max's strike rate this year. But regardless, you can't take away from the fact it's been a super, super dominant year for him and Red Bull. They've ticked the box of, winning that Constructors' Championship that they didn't last year, their first since 2013. And then also, they've hit the ground running with these new regulations. I mean, I know the whole cost cap thing is going to take away or detract a little bit from what they've achieved this year, and what ramifications will that have, or their penalties, with the reduction in wind tunnel time, have on next year and the year after. So whether this will be another Red Bull era, another Red Bull dynasty, if you want to say, it's too early to say. But, for two championships back-to-back for Verstappen, both coming not in the most savoury of circumstances, but it hasn't faltered him and his on-track performances this year. And Abu Dhabi, the crushing win, you got to say, it was 8.7 seconds ahead of Leclerc. Was another example of just how peerless he's been in terms of, any other driver on the grid. So qualifying, we had a Noah's Ark formation basically across the top six. You had your Red Bulls, you had your Ferraris, and then the Mercedes on the third row of the grid, the pair of the Mercedes, I should say. A bit disappointing given that there was promise in the practice sessions for Mercedes to potentially mix it, but again, being at a different altitude, different conditions, so last two races in Mexico and Brazil, different conditions and at a different altitude as well. The high altitudes don't require as much, downforce or whatever. I'm pretty sure it's that way around. I don't know. I've got a scrambled brain at the moment. It benefited them, whereas here in Abu Dhabi, they can't find any straight line speed because they're having to put a lot of downforce on to counter the porpoising effect. And that's something we haven't even talked about for quite some time now, the porpoising. So, that basically came back to bite them, did Mercedes, and I'm sure both Lewis Hamilton and George Russell will be glad to see the backside of the W13 as well, because it was really a mule when it comes to the other cars that Mercedes have made since they came into F1 or took over from Braun GP in 2010. So even those 2010, 2011 spec cars probably looked a bit better than this one did. But statistically, they've done all right. They've had many podiums. I mean, Hamilton himself, I think, has finished with 8 or 9 podiums this year. And then Russell, of course, picking up that maiden win in Brazil. This is starting to sound like a season review. Don't worry, there will be one hopefully coming in later weeks. But, here in Abu Dhabi, it was just a reminder of how far behind they've fallen behind, even Ferrari with the way that their results panned out. Russell coming home in 5th in the race, whilst Hamilton had a DNF and a mechanical DNF for Mercedes. They've not had one of those this year at all, so it's kind of apt for Hamilton in his first ever winless season in F1. That in itself is pretty not hilarious, but just astonishing, the fact that he's come this far, from 2007 and hasn't gone a season without winning. And even his first year at Mercedes in 2013, he got that sensational win in Hungary, which I'm sure many a fan will remember if you've been around with us since then. Come the race, you had a bit of a battle, I guess. Not really battle going into turn 1, but pretty much Max beat Checo, or was able to fend him off into turn 1. There was a even start, you could say, and for a minute there you probably thought that Checo could have done it, but no, that wasn't the case. Max led into turn 1 and then pretty much wasn't seen again. He pitted on lap 20 and had a one-stop strategy from medium to hards. Checo Perez, meanwhile, he was brought in quite early and Red Bull were trying to do a 2-stop strategy. And basically, they were kind of goated into this or baited into this by Ferrari. So, if Red Bull to take the bait from Ferrari is pretty significant, given that Ferrari's actually done something right in terms of strategy for once this season. So, unfortunately for Perez, the earlier pit stops in the stints hurt. Leclerc was able to extend his second stint and go on to the same sort of one-stop strategy that Max was running. And at the end of the day, the 2 points that Perez lost in Brazil by not being allowed to pass his teammate at the end there for 6th would have still only put him behind by 1 point in the Drivers' Championship if this result in Abu Dhabi played out like it did. So with Leclerc finishing 2nd ahead of him. So, I guess it's a bit of a bummer for them that they weren't able to get the 1-2 in the championship, but Leclerc, bringing home some kind of, some kind of recompense or, something to salvage for Ferrari. They can go at the end of the year to the board on, Mattia Binotto and whatnot, which we'll talk about later as well. Can say, hey, last year we finished 3rd in the championship, this year we finished 2nd, so in the Constructors' Championship, that is, so it's still a bit of a step up for them, but, Ferrari, they've got such high expectations, and everyone's got such high expectations of them that, if they're not winning, then, no one really cares, so, and that's the sad reality of it, and, why not just talk about Binotto for a second? So, of course, last week there were rumours about him potentially being replaced by Alfa Romeo team principal Frederick Vasseur. I mean, I love Fred, don't get me wrong, he's been great, ever since he came into F1, having been successful as the ART team boss in then GP2 and then F2, and he's doing a great job with Alfa Sauber, but I don't care who they replace Binotto with. You could have anyone in that position, it's not going to make a difference. And this is the thing that we've said about Ferrari, or I've said about Ferrari, not because I'm a Ferrari fan. It's, anyone looking at the situation with any kind of, rational view will say there's a fundamental problem within the organisation and within the team. Now, Binotto, sadly, this year, we've seen him not try to do what previous Ferrari team principals have in the past and point the finger at team members or put the blame on anyone. He's trying to be the people pleaser. But in doing that, you lose accountability, or, the people working for you, they lose their accountability. There has to be, I'm not saying you have to put some fear into them, there has to be accountability. And when you make mistakes on the pit wall or in the pit lane, when your drivers make mistakes as well, they've got to be held accountable for it. And I think, with this sort of lackadaisical culture there at Ferrari, they've fallen by the wayside. There's no discipline. You look at how great Mercedes are. They're a well-oiled machine. Red Bull as well, when it comes to all these other facets of being a successful F1 team or a successful race team. Ferrari have none of that. It's not about just making the fastest car and having two great drivers, two of the best drivers on the grid. It's all those other things that have to be put together to create a successful team. And, I guess in the aftermath of the success that they had in the early 2000s with the Dream Team and Michael Schumacher and all, there's no point trying to replicate that. You have to go down your own path and try and find a way to do it yourself, So I'm sure there'll be people out there who are like, no, Binotto's got to go, Binotto's got to go. Like, I didn't even think he was the right person to take over from Maurizio Arrivabene, who was team principal up until end of 2018, But such as the politics and the internal dramas at Ferrari that, it had to be done. And then here we are a few years later with Mattia Binotto, and now we're talking about him potentially facing the sack. So this is something that I don't understand about sports in general, and it sounds very naive coming from someone who's doing a motorsport podcast and talks about, knowing sport here and there. But when you have a problem, and your team is suffering, on ground or on the track or whatever in terms of results, you've got to look beyond just, the coach or the team principal or your players, your drivers, whatever. Sometimes problems go into, the front office and, fundamentally within the team as well. And that's where I think Ferrari have issues that they need to address going into the new year, because otherwise it's just going to be another repeat of what we've seen this year. And, there's going to be more and more drums beating, and then probably the easiest thing to do will be to sack the team principal and then start over. But it doesn't fix that core issue, because every 2 or 3 years we end up back at the same point, basically. And, Ferrari are still without a championship since 2007. A driver's title, that is. So, when is that little trend going to stop and we're going to actually see them win a championship, or at least sustain a championship battle until the final race, which is something we've not seen since 2012 there with Fernando Alonso. And even that year, the team couldn't even give him a car capable of winning races and championships. He just had to muscle the mule into contention, and to only then lose out by 3 points, as it were, is just a testament to Alonso and his skill rather than the team itself for making such a terrible car. Going back to the race then, we did have Perez close in on Leclerc with 4 laps to go, being on the fresher tyres, but it was a little too late. There was not enough laps in hand to make any kind of pass, and, he didn't have the pace of, that, you would have liked to have had to be able to make a pass with 4 laps to go. So that rounded out the podium. Carlos Sainz coming home in 4th, and he was a bit racy with Lewis Hamilton earlier in the race, and those two going into turn 6 was kind of a reminder of last year's race at the start on the opening lap where Hamilton had to abort going through the chicane and ended up cutting across it, but this time he did end up damaging the floor on the curb, on the sausage curb that they got there. They tried to one-stop before they ended up having that mechanical failure, but the Ferrari was still too quick for them on the day. Russell coming home in a lonely 5th, as I might have said earlier, but he did have a bit of a messy race, you got to say. It was a 5-second time penalty in there for an unsafe release in the pits. He almost took one of the McLarens out, so 5th was all he could manage. And then behind him, my goodness, Lando Norris with 6th. And what a season has Lando had. He had no competition for 7th in the Drivers' Championship, and that's behind the 3 top teams, and given that McLaren have finished behind Alpine in the Constructors' Championship, they've lost that 4th place to Alpine this time. Norris's performance has just been something else this season, and, again, it's just that painful thing of, we want to see him in a car capable of challenging the top 3 teams and being in contention regularly for the podium, even though we have seen him on the podium this year and in previous years too. When's that first win going to come? Certainly not as McLaren is at the moment, but can they make a step next year, back in the right direction? It remains to be seen. He was too good for Esteban Ocon, who was in 7th, and of course 7th enough for Alpine to score some points to finish ahead of McLaren in the championship. It was pretty much done and dusted after Brazil as it was, and it didn't really matter that Fernando Alonso in his final race for Alpine ended up with a mechanical failure as well. So, that's kind of summarises 2022 with Alpine has just been tons and tons of unreliability. And if you believe the words of the Spaniard himself, he keeps saying, I've lost X amount of points this year due to that. He might as well have won the World Championship is what, the impression you get from Alonso sometimes when he talks. But, his race came to an end quite early on as well. So that's him done and dusted with his 3rd stint at the Enstone team coming to a bit of an unceremonious end. The new team that he will be going to, Aston Martin, they had both their cars in the top 10. Lance Stroll in 8th with a 2-stop strategy, and there was a point during the race where he had knocked out his teammate Sebastian Vettel out of the points, and it was like, what are you doing, Aston? Get Seb back into the points. And Seb did a 1-stopper to come home in 10th. I think if he had gotten that one place ahead, that extra point for 9th, and he was battling with his old teammate Daniel Ricciardo for that, and Ricciardo on a 2-stop strategy too. It would have been the extra point that Aston Martin needed to finish 6th in the championship ahead of Alfa Romeo, so they tied on points at the end of the season, but on count back to, the better results coming in Alfa Romeo's favour, they finished in 6th, so that's a big leap up for Alfa, even though their recent races haven't had anything for them to celebrate. Again, both their drivers out of the points, but yet Guan Yu Zhou down in 12th and Valtteri Bottas in 15th. But, important there because this was the final race for Daniel Ricciardo. Potentially, in F1, it will be for now, certainly. But also, Vettel, his final race before he heads into retirement. And, all the messages that we've seen during the week that, I've read and viewed and everything, Danke Seb is, that's like, basically that's the most basic version of what you can say to Seb. There's been so much love and support, which is great. And again, like I said last week, it's been such a love-hate-love relationship with him because, at the start of his career, 2010 when he won his first championship, it was all about Seb. It was all about him in his corner. 2011 too, but then 2012 2012, 2013, it was kind of like, oh, we're getting sick of the Seb domination here. You know, he's not really, and Multi-21, he's not really the greatest of characters, is he? But then, you know, I grew to appreciate and enjoy watching him race again when he moved to Ferrari, and there was that, you know, that kind of rose-tinted view that he could emulate what the great Michael Schumacher did, but unfortunately it didn't come to pass. But it's such a beautiful human being is Seb, and his message after the race, you know, when they interviewed him on the grid in Parc Ferme, was so important. I think, you know, about life is just, you know, life is more than just the racetrack. I think he was kind of a summary of what he said, and to me, you know, even though I'm not a racing driver or am not involved, you know, directly in having a day-to-day role with racing or with F1 or anything, it was an important message in the sense of it's, you know, life is more than, you know, your day job kind of thing, or what you do in that respect as an occupation kind of thing. And excuse me for getting a bit emotional and philosophical about this, but given the year that, you know, I've had, my partner has had this year, you know, with losing a dad, and he was one of those people who, you know, work was everything, you know, work. I'm very busy, so busy I can't, you know, catch up, or don't have time to see my family, don't have time to see, you know, there's more to life than just that. And I don't want to be one of those people who, you know, something like that happened and, you know, I've not had the time to spend with loved ones and do things that really make you happy. And Seb as well, with what he's trying to do for, not for him necessarily, or, you know, people of his generation, but for his children and you know, generations to come, with the whole environmental push and sustainability, equality as well. You know, it's about improving that quality of life for generations to come, rather than, you know, just having this insular view on, you know, what my today looks like, or what my next week looks like. It's about the long term, and, you know, I hope we get to see the fruits of his labour and the fruits of his efforts play out and everything. But at the end of the day, it's hard not to dislike a character like that, to dislike a human like that, you know, and seeing some vitriol as well about, you know, oh, you know, him and Lewis are, you know, woke and all this. It's disgusting. Like, you know, who are you entitled brats being able to just sit there and comment like that, just because you've probably got, you know, everything in the world and you haven't had to struggle and stuff like that through things like racism and inequality and all that. It doesn't mean, you know, you can come out and start calling people names like this, or saying, oh, you know, I don't like him because he's woke, or he doesn't deserve to be in F1 because of this and that, you know, or because they're woke, or they've got this opinion. That's just horrible, you know. And someone like Vettel and Hamilton, they're trying to do things for everybody, you know. They're trying to, I don't know, it just sounds like waffle now, but, you know, they're trying to create a better world for everyone to live in, not just, you know, a particular group of people who are entitled to, you know, everything as they want to. If I was able to swear, I'd really dig into it, but no, I'm going to leave it at that. So congratulations, Seb, on your career. Congratulations on scoring that point. It sounds so horrible. Congratulations for scoring a world championship point, given this is a driver who's got 53 race wins and 4 world championships, but he's done a fine job there. Outside of the points, Mick Schumacher, in his last race for Haas, he was 16th, unfortunately. Still finished ahead of his teammate Kevin Magnussen. And Mick did get a 5-second time penalty for hitting Nicholas Latifi, who was also in his last race in F1 too. So the GOAT, Latifi, of course, not going to be driving for Williams. And that's because also Logan Sargent in F2 wraps up the year in the F2 Championship and had enough super license points to get himself into F1. So that's confirmed now that he will be Williams driver next year alongside Alex Albon. And then, of course, we had Mick Schumacher potentially going to Mercedes as a reserve driver, and then of course Daniel Ricciardo as well being offered a role at Red Bull in a reserve or test driver ambassadorial kind of thing. So we'll just have to wait and see how that pans out, whether he accepts that role or not. But yeah, that's the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. That's 2022 all done for F1. I'll have some more thoughts, I guess. I'm going to let them, marinate for the next couple of weeks before I do a season review. Go do this trip to Adelaide 500, and then come back and get stuck into it. It's good, we've ended the season with a month to go till Christmas and the New Year as well, whereas last year we were kind of midway through December when the season wrapped, and then of course we had all the fallout as well of the championship battle and the controversy that we did see at Abu Dhabi. So at least this time we do get a bit of time to talk about the season as a whole and reflect on the year that has been 2022 in F1. So I will leave it at that. Moving it over to then supercars and the Adelaide 500. Not much really to preview as such just yet. It'll probably look better once we get closer to the event, but because I won't be recording again until after. But it's a return to the streets of Adelaide for the first time since 2019, and there was a period in that time since 2020. They did have a 2020 race there before COVID, and there was a time since it looked like it wasn't going to ever come back because they did officially can it, and then of course the Labor leader for South Australia went on a big campaign during the election to bring back the Adelaide 500. That was his key promise, and I'm sure many citizens of South Australia would have voted Labor just to get the Adelaide 500 back. They are quite passionate and they do love their motorsport. And yeah, here it is. And given the fact that I was already going to be in Adelaide that week, for a Guns N' Roses concert that got postponed a couple of years ago in 2020 due to COVID, it was a no-brainer to actually say, hey, let's get tickets to the Adelaide 500 too this weekend, because it's going to be a good little weekend. See some supercars racing, and the Adelaide race has always been something I wanted to see. Obviously, I'm too young to have been able to have gone to the F1 race that they had up there until 1995, but for the 500 as it is, it's been a mainstay on supercars, so it was a travesty that they actually got rid of it in the first place. So it's two 250k races with fuel stops, the two top 10 shootouts as well to precede the races. Championships all over, so we don't have to worry about that, but there are minor placings to look at. I think there's like second and some some teams championship results as well, hinging on what happens in Adelaide. It's also the farewell to Holden as well, so there was news today that 888 and Walkinshaw and Andretti United are going to run some tribute liveries to Holden, so can't wait to see what they look like next week as well. I'm going to have plenty of photos, so be sure to come and follow my Instagram channel or account, whatever you want to call it, which is at Dr46th. You'll see it in my Linktree anyway. So yeah, looking forward to that. There's Super 2 as well, and of course the finale with 5 drivers in contention, I believe. S5000, Giancarlo Fisichella, ex-F1 driver, will be there in S5000, so that'll be worth a watch too. And the Australian GT Championship, or the GT World Challenge Australia, going to be part of it as too. So, lots to look forward to there. I can't wait. I was looking at the track map today and was like, this is where my grandstand is. This is where I want to go suss out, some cool activations and displays. There's also the concerts as well, so I'm looking forward to that. They've got the Killers playing on the Sunday night, so for the price of my ticket or included with my ticket for the weekend is the ticket to go see the Killers, and there's some other bands as well, like Lime Cordial, if you've heard of them. Amy Shark is pretty popular as well. Jimmy Barnes is going to be there, not that he's my cup of tea at all. So it's going to be a great little weekend. It's going to be a great week. I'm looking forward to it so much. Other than that, you won't hear from me until after I get back from Adelaide. That's when I'll do sure some kind of supercars wrap up and also the F1 season review. Other than that, I hope you guys stay well. Be sure to check out the podcast Twitter page at the Apex Media. Not that there is much going on there, and of course use the Linktree to follow through to my profile on the Raw for my articles and stuff. So I'm sure I'll have some content coming to wrap up the season as well in writing form, and then of course the season reviews for the podcast as well to come later, and of course the Instagram. So yeah, don't forget about that. Other than that, thanks for tuning in this week. Hope you guys have a good one. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.